The wayfinding landscape is changing, so welcome to Endpoint's Wayfinding Xchange Podcast. We want to connect with leading experts, tech innovators, and key contributors to exchange knowledge and innovation in physical and digital wayfinding. We want to shape the future of wayfinding through discussion, collaboration, and shared expertise. And this is why we have created this podcast series. Enjoy the episode.
Welcome to this episode of Wayfinding Xchange Podcast, where we explore the evolving landscape of the built environment. I'm Alison Richards, and today I'm joined by Sean Lockie, a leader in sustainable design and engineering. Sean is an experienced project leader with extensive expertise in decarbonisation and climate resilience. His work spans the complex interplay of policy, governance, finance, social justice and technology. His international career includes roles at Atkins, the EU, the Building Research Establishment and Arup. His experience working with the private sector, cities, funders, policymakers and academia has given him a unique perspective on finding innovative solutions to the climate crisis. In today's world, sustainability is no longer a choice, it's a necessity. So we're thrilled to dive into how Sean and his team are addressing the urgent need to decarbonise our cities and infrastructure, and why this mission is so critical in shaping a resilient, greener future for us all. Thank you for joining us, Sean, and welcome.
Alison, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Great to be here.
Can I just ask at the beginning, I think it'd be really good just to hear a little bit about you. How did your career lead you into sustainability?
That's a good question. I think there are a few things. One was how you're shaped as a child. The other, I think, was some of the people that influenced me while I was at university. Then, you know, it has been a continual and evolving sort of process. I'm not the person I was when I graduated university all those years ago, when roles and careers in sustainability were very, very rare. So I think if I just unpack those in a bit more detail, I mean, my childhood was mixed between Nairobi and Accra. So one city, they're both sort of quite mega cities on the east coast of Africa, and the one on the west. And both of those experiences, I think, you know, give you access to, you know, nature, but also species that are under threat and extinction. Poachers and those sorts of things, and then when I was about 10, I left Accra and moved to New Zealand, which is where my parents were from. And again, in that environment, you see the impact of human impact on an island that was, you know, essentially uninhabited, maybe sort of 10,000 years ago. Yeah. And then working that way through there's, you know, a couple of inspirational people that really affected me when I was at university. And one of them was a key figure in what's called Agenda 21, which is the agenda for the 21st century, a guy called Tony Watkins. And I think after a year of Tony, there was no turning back.
That sounds really intriguing. Okay. And I think I'd like to ask probably one of the hardest hitting questions is, what's the honest truth about where we're at when it comes to climate change? We hear lots of different things from the press. Some people say we're moving in the right direction, or, you know, is it a case that there's lots of challenges that we still have to overcome?
I think the narrative has definitely addressed the truth. The climate deniers, which was really problematic a decade ago, even up to were putting out fake news and stories into the environment, into the media environment, had a massive. It slowed down, you know, the movement. I think where we're at now is, you know, everyone that I speak to is kind of on board, but we're caught in a place where there's so many options, so many pathways, so many roadmaps, so many marks, indicators that were a little bit caught in, where do I start? How do I commence this journey? And I'd say also there is a need to really look at business models, the way the finance system, etc., kind of work, and that needs some redesign, some rethinking, and that part I don't think we've done. I think we've done, tweaking the system, improving the emissions from products and that sort of thing. The move to electric vehicles, the phasing out of gas boilers, the phasing out of fossil fuels in electricity production and the grid and that kind of thing. Massive amounts of progress, but it's going to be quite challenging to do that final piece of transition, because it's going to really disrupt a number of business models.
And do you think we can do it, that final transition?
I think so. I mean, I think there are lots of really good resources which kind of line up the solutions. The problem is usually capital and availability of resource to actually transition in that way. It is expensive to change your business model and move from a linear way of producing something to something that is circular, and there is often not a demand for some of that. So you're creating the demand. You get in too early, and it can have a massive effect on your bottom line. And we've seen quite a few companies get in there too early, and not being able to be profitable within the first sort of 2 to 3 years. So I think the solutions are there. We need finance, we need skills, and we need combinations of those solutions to work in new ways for that to shift. But it also comes down to, it's not all governments action. It's not all industries action. It's not all citizen action. It's actually requires something much more systemic and changes across the board in order for us to sort of realize that challenge that we're talking about. And it is a massive opportunity in terms of what we're talking. I mean, World Bank and others could talk about it as being, and IMF talk about it as being a sort of a $3 trillion opportunity.
Wow, that's a big opportunity. But I guess it is really hard to change. I mean, we as people, although we're quite adaptable, we do struggle with change and changing how systems work. I wanted to ask about citizen action, because I think that we as individuals sit there and think, well, I do the basics. I do my recycling. I'm a good citizen. I try to buy my power from green sources. I do my best, but I feel like a very, very small piece of the much, much bigger sort of puzzle. And you work with citizen activation a lot and get citizen action as a part of what you do. And I wondered if you could talk a little about what that means in the context of sustainability and urban development, and just how people can get involved and what differences us as individuals can make.
Citizens are massively important in this. It's, the citizen that is doing the consumption, that is doing the buying, that is voting for the governments in the municipalities.
True.
So they're the ones that are key. But the challenge is, how do I make my hour or my 10 hours effective in a platform? Is it about having an allotment, or I've got a few hours, how do I give it?
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the challenge, is actually getting situations where all of those hours collectively actually add up to something really impactful. Yeah. And the things that you mentioned, Alison, in your sort of opener of, I do my recycling, that sort of thing, it's often potential. There's often potential for much, much more, but the citizen hasn't yet, seen it. So streets as living labs, much more sort of, collective working across, a sharing economy. We have lots of assets that we have within our home that potentially could be, used and shared across an economy. And once one of the interesting things I think about some of the sharing economy stuff that I've been involved in is once you share something, whether that be a drill or a lawnmower or a car or a bicycle, you get to know your neighbor. And then once you've know your neighbor, then it's not the person that you pass in the street, but you've got something to their, communicator. And then things might become a bit more, in the trusted realm where you might start to share childcare. You might start to, think about other areas where some of that working together can be effective. I mean, a couple of the projects that we've been involved in with Arup, we do after the climate emergency, a lot of local authorities declared a climate emergency, and around 2019, 2020, and climate action plans came out of that process. Now, what actually happened, I think, when you look at the first generation of those plans, is they were done in a very meaningful way by the municipalities, but they probably use language that wasn't understood by the community, and there wasn't that community buy-in. And how do I do my thing? How do I get involved? So a thing called a citizen assembly was dreamt up. I think it was probably a Nordic thing, where you, over an intensive period, the citizens get together and then they feed into that process. And what we saw in some work that we did with Lambeth is the citizen assembly was so well functioning that this was the entity to accelerate, not Arup come in and try and lay down a plan for the citizens, but actually enable the citizen assembly to undertake that. And they had a whole lot of really interesting things like incredible edible Lambeth, a lot of sharing economy, and an organization that we spotted that was really effective there was We Rise, and we worked a lot with them. And what we found through that process is there were certain voices that were not heard in the process. So that might be older people, single parents that are just struggling with too much, or in this case it was young people of color from economically deprived backgrounds. There was no representation of that of that cohort within the group. So with We Rise, we met them where they were, and we ran a number of futures sessions where we asked them, if you were to get involved in the green economy, what would the areas be that you would be interested in? And we settled on three things: organic and healthy food, I think inspired by incredible edible Lambeth, circular fashion, and the other was green jobs in the retrofit at scale area. And so we ran 3 surgeries workshops in that area, and as a result, some skills pathways were developed from that. But we also, incredibly importantly for the climate action plan, we brought those views into the plan. So I think that's the takeaway. Be humble as an advisor. Look for the organizations that you can empower and get them to move to next level in order to bring the citizens with them.
I think that's really important. I think there's something as well about ownership, in the sense of, you live on a street and you will say, well, this is my street, but then you don't feel like you have the ability to affect what happens on that street, but it is your street. So the idea that you can step outside of your world into the wider community and be a part of it, I think is really key. And it's something that we talk about when we're looking at projects around things like how do you create wayfinding that supports people moving as pedestrians rather than getting into their cars, because using your car is more convenient and easy and simple, and that kind of taking ownership, being a part of the streetscape, means you're more likely to move around it and kind of enjoy it and be a part of it. So I think it has some resonance. I think there's something else about co-design in all of
design
this.
thinking, co-design. I fully agree.
And, getting people involved in the design process at every step of the way. And there's something about those hidden voices as well.
Yeah.
That's a real struggle. It's a struggle. I think it can be a struggle to know who those hidden voices are and where to find them and to support them to be a major part of the process.
And I think as the consultant or the partner working, you're time bound. There's a deliverable, and you'd love to keep extending, and you'd love another feedback loop, and you'd love, to be able to sort of reiterate and what if. But the model, and that's one of the really difficult things of being, in the consultancy space is, seeing it through to delivery. It breaks your heart, where you've put a lot of effort into a plan, and then the next phase sort of gets retendered or something, and you're not appointed, and you just know what you would have done with that if you had a bit more continuity.
Absolutely. And I think continuity on projects like that is really important because, for everybody involved in that partnership, really, it's the continuity that helps draw people in, and you make promises to each other, I think, and you want to carry those promises through. I think it's really important. I wanted to ask about some of the concepts in urban planning that seem to be coming to the forefront, the idea of the 15-minute city and how we might plan our neighbourhoods to be more sustainable. And, as I said just now, it kind of impacts us when we're trying to think about how we move people around spaces so that people feel like it's their space and they're not just walking along somebody else's street. But I also wondered if there are any key takeaways around sustainable urban planning.
Yeah, there is. I think, the 15-minute city, there was some unhelpful debate, wasn't there, about a year or so about this.
There was some in Oxford.
Yeah, and other places too. And, they're trying to get us out of our cars. And, it was like, why wouldn't you want to walk to your school, to your place of work, to your local shop? What was it about, wanting to get in a car? And I think some of this is almost about demonstration. And I think, if you look at some of the really successful ones, like, maybe, what Barcelona have done in the super block, where every sort of second street, but they had to do it really incrementally. There's no way the residents would have accepted the big bang overnight. It was sort of every second street, and then, how's that going? And then a bit more, and then a bit more. And now when you look at the way that space is used for activity and play, and the effect on air pollution, and now a lot of it's being planted, so the effect on urban heat island and temperature. I mean, these are places that get very hot in summer. The positive effect, on that, as well. I think there's a point of just being curious, experimenting, bringing citizens on, and decision makers on that journey. There would have definitely been difficult forks in the road in Barcelona's decision, and many others that have gone that way as well. But now we are so lucky to have these as demonstrations that, can be visited or can be, even, read about as inspiration. Yeah. And I think, then what's going on in a place will never be a cut and paste. It's got to be contextualized and made specific to that locality. But the inspiration that you can get from being curious and, from seeing, what others have done, where in other places like some of the Italian cities, where rivers have been relit, they've been brought out. There were, there were roads over them, and then the effect of that, on calming the city, also on urban heat island, also air quality, but also the adjoining properties that now enjoy a water view where it would have been sort of traffic. All of those sorts of points go into, making the business case for that kind of change. And, demonstration, I think, is, showing how something can be done. It need not be, the full demonstration in one place. It might be a piece of something in lots of different places, and then they get, assessed and then added up together to make that sort of overall picture of what might work and what might not. One that I've got in the back of my mind that I think would be a great one, if we could get a home that has gone through a retrofit at scale, is zero carbon, does generate all its own electricity, has a lot of nature built within it, is enabled for the sharing economy, and you could go there and spend a week and just see what it was like to be in that kind of environment.
Yeah.
I think something like that would be a real sort of trigger. Many of the demonstrations that we see are, a heat pump and it's not very exciting, is it?
Yeah.
It
it's
doesn't
just like,
really,
it's just a thing.
That thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the whole package. When that whole package comes together,
Yeah.
it's that's what I think when you get that. Oh, okay, it could be. Yeah, and especially if your energy costs are near zero. I mean, that's amazing that you can get to that point now.
Definitely. I mean, I'd love to. Not my Victorian house. I'm not sure how possible that is.
Possible.
But also sustainability is being kind of underwritten into building standards. There's a lot of certification. I'm going to say that again. There's a lot of certification around. So we have BREEAM, WELL and LEED. And obviously there's the LEED is the big kind of American version. BREEAM and BREEAM is the sort of more British version, I think. I might have got those the wrong way around. How do you rate those standards? Are they really helpful? Are they kind of giving everybody a framework which at least gives everybody a foundation to build on?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was part of the really early group that developed BREEAM many years ago at the Building Research Establishment, and BREEAM was before LEED actually.
It's a lot older than LEED actually, isn't it?
Yeah,
by
it's
some 20 years or something.
I don't think that long, but it at least 5 to 7. So
sure.
yeah, it's a bit like it was the UK professor that invented the internet, right?
Yeah.
But Silicon Valley did pretty well out of it. So the UK was definitely was first with that, and then that led and that led to LEED, which which came out of the US, and WELL has much more of a focus on indoor air quality and indoor quality. They're great, but the industry has moved so fast since they were invented. I mean, they're invented to be ahead of where regulation is and to push that to the next sort of level. But you see now what we have is Paris alignment wasn't a term that was heard of when BREEAM was developed.
Yeah.
And in order for a building to be aligned with the emissions that had been agreed at Paris, it needs to have a massive reduction in its fossil fuel use. And what you have with these rating systems is the investor community and the developers and the occupiers, they're used to a rating level. And so if you now said BREEAM outstanding, it needs to massively change because, in order for it to be Paris aligned, we're going to need to change all the carbon and energy part of the points within the system. You can imagine what impact that would have on assets that have been previously rated using it.
Yeah.
So that's the dilemma that those rating systems have right now, is the ask of the planetary boundaries is much greater than what they're able to give. So what we're seeing, a new sort of entrance into the market, something like Passive House, for example, which is very, 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 very efficient in terms of what's called U value, where the heat passes through the wall, and air tightness, where you don't let unwanted air in or out of the property.
Yeah. There's always the fear that some of these certifications become kind of box ticking exercises, and I guess if there is the case that the standards are having to change because the crisis is of that kind of magnitude, that those certificates lose some of their meaning. So I guess these new grades coming through become really, really important. Do you think there's enough innovation in the building industry with developers in general to really bring some of these things into the fore? I'm thinking about producing houses off-site in a factory where you can get the tolerances really good, and then bringing them in, and it only takes a day or two to build them. Those kinds of innovations that in theory should support us building more sustainable housing. Do you think that there's enough of that innovation? Do you think developers are a bit frightened of it?
Well, I think what you have is you have the kind of the real front runners that win all the awards and are quite well resourced and have heads of sustainability and know what SBTI is, and they know what CREM is and BREEAM and LEED and all those sorts of things. But they are still a small proportion of the overall consumption footprint. It's that sort of middle. It's a bit like a triangle. They're at the top part of the triangle. But it's that middle and lower that is really difficult to access and to change. It's a great example on offsite. The challenge, with offsite, for many of these sort of smaller firms is they have relationships with supply chains and they're used to doing things in a certain way. It's always done that way.
I know this too well. I'm sorry. I have to confess that I lived in a house that was a part of the one of the build offsite competitions. And after 4 years, they told us that the houses were falling down and full of dry rot. They're wooden houses full of dry rot. Hence why I now live in a Victorian house, because I went from really amazing future house, dream home, felt completely like it'd been ripped apart by poor quality building, to at least something that's been around for 125 years and therefore I'm still going to be standing in my lifetime. Anyway, that's a little aside. Please carry on.
That's a shame. That's a shame that they didn't work out.
I know.
But I think, also, so there's the way the existing supply chain is set up. Then there's skills. And whether those skills are ready and timely for an offsite and revolution. And then, of course, there's the time that goes into investing into the offsite system.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at some of the, there's a firm called Top Hat, for example, and it's really future. It's got like a white room and you go in, robotic arms and, it's quite something. But then you look at what that tooling up cost would have been, and that's quite significant.
Yeah, true.
But I think also there are other benefits in that approach. So tight sites, if it's made off site and it's then craned into position, then you don't have a lot of noise, and that's been a additional benefit that has not always been clear, when you're working in sort of central city areas where noise pollution and also air quality pollution from the construction process is an issue, then you don't have any of that with offsite.
Yeah, no, that's true. I wanted to ask about, we work a lot in the Middle East. We have an office in Dubai, and it is quite a significant market. I think everybody knows at the moment that there's a lot of development going on, particularly in Saudi. It's got some really unique climate challenges. I mean, it's desert land, it's really hot, and it's obviously getting hotter because of the climate change. There were significant storms in Dubai earlier this year. Also, we've got economies that are trying to develop away from their current model. certainly oil is coming off the table over time, and there's a lot of work around tourism, soft power being a really strong economy in other ways. How easy is it for those types of economies to develop and maintain a really good level of environmental responsibility? Do the two work? Do they go hand in hand?
That area is such a diverse place, and there's lots of different, tolerances and, approaches, culture, backgrounds, that it's difficult to say something, across the entire region. But I think what you picked up on is really interesting, and the Dubai effect, the storms that, what we found, because we also are involved, and we have an office there too, is the cities there, the districts, and the infrastructure was just not designed for taking water.
Yeah.
And so that's their current problem is, how do we solve the existing challenge for when the next storm happens, but everything else that's kind of flowing and coming through. Obviously, there's a massive solar potential, which I think is the transition to solar is still quite slow, I think. But then there's a lot of thinking and R&D and going into that process. But the whole plan and building design, you're probably going to see a different vernacular and style and typology kind of come through. A lot more external shading, a lot more thermal mass in the buildings. You may not be going anywhere near as tall as what we've been seeing, because the design questions start to become very different when you start to take into account climate.
Absolutely. I think it's really important. And at the same time, we talk about the social impact of sustainability and the idea of decarbonisation. Sometimes by doing something really sustainable, it can have unintended social consequences. How do you manage those challenges? Because you can't always foresee them.
Yeah, I think the social... Well, let's talk more about opportunity, I think, because...
Sure.
The kind of... the kind of workload, you just take UK, for example, 24 million homes, I think is the number, and something like that. And all of those are going to need some sort of retrofit plan because a lot of the emissions are sitting in housing and heating. That's a massive job opportunity.
Yeah.
And the kind of questions that are coming out at that sort of national level is that a opportunity for the kind of construction corporates, or is there a different model where you could have sort of pop-up training and the community gets much more involved in in the solution and creates those local jobs. Where I'd just be interested to get a bit more from you as to what that perverse outcome might be, because for me it's all kind of upside.
No, I think upside is what we're looking for. I guess I look back, in my lifetime, and I mean, it's probably a terrible example, but I think back to Thatcher and the coal mines and, Arthur Scargill saying you close all the pits, you're going to put thousands of people out of work. And in reality, what you're doing is taking an entire town that only survives on that one thing and putting everybody out of business. And it's an unintended consequence of something else. I think it's about us understanding that there is potential for these unintended consequences and how we might be able to foresee them and mitigate them. And I think actually your answer gives us quite a lot of hope, because as you say, it's about changing the model and doing things in a different way. And what happens if we put it back into the hands of the community rather than it being something that happens to you? You're a part of the change in a really positive way. I think that's what's really interesting. But
I think thank you, Alison, for that. an industry in transition is, fossil fuels, right? You just look at what the policy levers and triggers are towards fuel, heat pumps. And, heat pumps are a technology that provide the heat through electricity, not through gas. There's a lot of, get gas out. Yeah. So that will have an impact on a certain set of jobs. But if I look at our own firm, 5 years ago, Arup said we will not be involved anymore in the exploration or refinement of oil. If there's an organization that's in oil that wants to transition, we'll help them transition. Yeah. But we're no longer in that. And that affected a big chunk, a chunk of the business. You can imagine being in the boardroom that day and going, oh. But actually, the transition to hydrogen and offshore wind and solar and some of these, and EV and public transport and was overnight, and it had a very positive effect on the firm ultimately, because we were now ahead of the competition in some of those those fuel races. Yeah.
So it is about looking for the unforeseen things and getting something good from it.
Pick choices, and in those, listen to the non-usual suspects. Those what are the small firms doing? Where are the startups focusing? What are they saying about the the beachhead of something that's completely new? Be very curious in that. You don't have all the answers. There's a whole lot of new stuff that will be coming, through that, will revolutionize things, and actually, realizing that, we're playing our part, but sometimes we don't know, and in the we don't know, where might we find something? And I think academia has a role here, and I think a lot of some of that. Academic research, it just gets a little bit buried in the institution. Oh, that's, if I said, oh, that's very academic, you'd probably say that's probably not a positive thing, right? Academic, pages of stuff. But in that academic thinking, there's a lot of potential future of, what's coming, what's in the labs. Be curious around those spaces as well, and, partner with them.
I think for me, the biggest takeaway from what you've said is that actually it's all a really positive message. And I love the idea that by being curious, we can make massive changes, and putting things back in the hands of the community and people being part of the community. It feels bigger than sustainability. It feels like a much more natural, and nice is a terrible word, but a nice way to live. And I think it's it seems like a really good way of thinking about the world. And I think a lot of the time people think of sustainability as quite doom and gloom and we're all going to die. But I think it's been really positive. So thank you. I'm just mindful of time. I want to thank you for joining me today. And it's been a really great conversation. So thank you.
You're welcome. It's been, can I leave a final thought?
Please do.
Yeah. So final thought, I think, the 3 R's, right? Reduce, reuse, recycle. And, we spoke about that for forever, but I remember an academic actually saying, there's a fourth R. And I said, well, what's that? And it's redesign. And he, in that moment, 9 years ago, was absolutely right. It's the rethinking of the process that is so fundamental to the outcomes that we want to create in the future.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to our latest Wayfinding Xchange podcast. Stay tuned for further episodes and feel free to contact us with any questions and suggestions for future episodes.